This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Today, Justin Brien is a mental health advocate, inspirational speaker, and professional coach. But he only got here after a 16-year battle with his own mental health and self-worth. Justin is joining me here today to share his story and to help other people find their voice. Hi, Justin.
Hey there, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great, actually.
So a 16-year battle with your own mental health. That's a long time.
Well, actually, it was a 16-year long battle with addiction from drugs and alcohol. It was almost like a lifelong battle with my own mental health. So, yeah, from a very young age, I had low self-worth, low self-esteem, low self-confidence. I always compared myself to other people. I didn't have like a bad upbringing or anything like that. But I always wanted to be somebody else. I wanted to be bigger. I wanted to be faster, stronger. I wanted to be liked more, even though people liked me. I wanted to be almost like the center of attention. I had to, I goofed off a lot or tried to make a lot of jokes, but ultimately I didn't like being who I was. And that ended up escalating when I got out of high school to, drugs and alcohol.
I've heard from, and you know what, admittedly, it was something that I used to as a crutch in high school, to have a better sense of belonging. But did you start dabbling with drugs and alcohol in high school and then it sort of escalated from there, or was it something that came about afterwards?
Well, I drank a little bit in high school, not much. Like I probably got drunk maybe I think a handful of times. But I no drugs for sure. No, the first time I ever touched a drug, I was 21 and I smoked marijuana. Which do you, do you classify that as a drug anymore? I'm
I was
not
going to
sure.
say, I'm in Canada, so no, it's not a drug.
Yeah, so am I.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, it's not a drug.
Yeah. Although, I mean, if you overuse it, it can lead to paranoia and like it can definitely crutch you. But
Yes.
I barely drank in high school. But when I got out of high school, I moved away for hockey. I'm Canadian, right?
I was going to say, okay, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So I moved away for hockey, and then I started drinking while I was away. And right from then and there, like I lived on my own. I had my billet house actually they rented an apartment for us. So I started drinking a little bit more and a little bit more because I felt it gave me this false sense of confidence. Like it made me into somebody that I thought was funny, somebody I thought I liked, somebody I thought other people would like. But it made me kind of like it's weird because I'm like an introverted extrovert. I can love my alone time, but I want to be outgoing. I can turn it on. I could throw on that mask basically. But it made me into somebody I thought I liked. After hockey at 21, I moved to Vancouver and I smoked marijuana, but I didn't really get hooked on it or anything. It just, it made me eat too much food. But I started bartending downtown Vancouver and I was out every single night. I'd close up the bar within 15 minutes and I'd be out for power half hour, power hour, however long I could get. And I tried to drink as much as I could to where the other bartenders would the manager would be like, well, how come Justin can close it down in 15 minutes? It takes you 30 to 45 minutes, or I could get everything done, cash out, stocked, because I needed that drink. I needed to get out for that alcohol. And I'd usually go out by myself and just, go to talk to the bartenders that we all knew or run into people that you knew. But ultimately, I was like kind of going out by myself and I'd drink as much as I could and then get home and I'd order, a bottle off of whoever and they drop it off my house and I'd drink even more by myself. And after I got back home, I'd take in a 2-6 to myself basically every single night. And I'd mix it with, 1 can of pop, just all the alcohol and then just a little bit of pop. So just
Wow.
1 can. Eventually, one of the other bartenders, he's like, hey man, can I ask you something? I'm like, yeah, sure. Do you think you're an alcoholic? I'm like, No, I'm like, I'm 24 years old. Like, I like to have fun. But he was an ex-alcoholic, and he told me a story, and I knew a story and why he didn't drink. So actually, that night on the way home, like I did what I always do, got closed the bar, went out. But on the way home, I'm walking across Handy Street Bridge, and I start looking up, and I start asking myself these questions: do you drink too much? Do you think you're an alcoholic? And the answer is no. I'm 24. I like to have fun. I'm in the big city. I'm a bartender. But it also came down to saying this, I'm too smart to be an alcoholic. So I started actually correlating alcoholism with being a low life, being not normal. And you know what? I go to work, I'm paying my bills, I got friends, I'm normal, right? This is
You're
12 years ago.
functioning.
Yeah. So I was functioning sort of, right? I black out a lot, but I'd still go to work. And then one time I tell people I graduated. I did cocaine for the first time at 24 years old. And I don't remember the night, but my buddy told me the next day, he said something, the worst thing he probably could have said to me is like, man, you were funny last night. Yeah. And that, for a guy like me, that, people would be like, oh, what do you mean? That's good. You're funny.
That was
But
just
no,
fueling the fire.
it
Yeah.
triggered me to be like, okay, now I have alcohol to make me love myself, and now I have cocaine to talk to people. So, or to be funny. So I started like having almost like an algorithm where I started to have to drink to go out before I left my house, or I'd have to get there and do like a bunch of hard shots and then I'd have to have this many drinks to talk to this girl, this many drinks to go on the dance floor. And then, by the end of it, I'm blacked out but it just turned into a vicious cycle, and it is over night after night after night after night. And then we'll fast forward about 6, 7 months. I ended up moving back home to Seminar, and I remember I'm managing a nightclub, and I remember having this conversation with a buddy, and I know exactly where we were, and the topic of depression came up, and I looked at him, and I'm like, you know what, man? Depression's for the weak. It's an excuse. You got to man up. You got to go to work, and you got to bottle your feelings in. So at 24 years old, within the same year, I started correlating alcoholism with being a low life. I'm too smart. Depression with being weak and an excuse. Little do I know, those are my two main problems. There's, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I quickly became actually an alcoholic, and then I was becoming a drug addict.
So when did it all come to a head? When did you realize that you can't keep living life that way?
Well, finally at 28, I was moving around a bit. Like I was almost like a gypsy, like just moving around from town to town, just bartending, having fun. But I started, I really started drinking. I like started to miss work and losing jobs because I craved alcohol so much. I could barely get through a shift without drinking because I'd be so hungover. Or I went to shift drunk, right? And finally at 28, I moved back home again because went home at 24, moved away, came back at 28, and I started to become suicidal. So for 6 straight years, I was contemplating suicide, and when I came up with a plan, and it was starting to scare me, but the plan wasn't until later on. But at 28, I was becoming suicidal. I'm like, okay, I need help for this. So I started going to counseling, and it's in the beginning it works. You go sober for how long, and then all of a sudden you learn, it's like, holy cow, I can't cope without this alcohol, because I used alcohol to cope or to leave my house. And then I used it to play hockey, to talk to people, to have conversations. I don't know how to live sober. So then I isolate. And then what do I do when I isolate? Well, then I beat myself up. My internal dialogue starts to change of, well, why can't you be normal like those guys? So then my best friend eventually became alcohol. So where I'd have drinks beside me, it'd bring a calm over me. And then I just do drugs. All I wanted to do, honestly, was just hang out by myself, drink and do drugs, and just be left alone. That's what I craved. Fast forward and then I started to miss work again. I'm working at a mill. Then I'm like, okay, I need to take a leave of absence, and I need to go to rehab. But I had a kid on the way. So me and my girlfriend were broken up at the time, but we ended up getting together on my birthday. And 3 months later, she's like, hey, listen, I'm pregnant. So I was like, oh no, okay, I need to get better. So well, that wasn't my first initial reaction. I crashed a car, drinking and driving, and I'm like, yeah, I have to get better. So I went to rehab, but I went with the wrong mindset. I went with, I'm going to get out of town. I'm going to go work out. I train twice a day. I went to all my classes, but as soon as I got out, I'm like, oh, I'm going to drink again. I'm just taking a break, right? Just I refused to accept the fact that I shouldn't drink. And then every time I went and got help, counseling, medication, um, every time I start to feel better, I was like, no, I don't need you. I don't need your help. I can do this alone. And every time I went sober, 1, 2, 3 months, I can have one more. I just want to have one more. So I got out of rehab. 6 months later, or within 3 months, I'm going downhill. My son's born at 6 months. At his age, 6 months old, my girlfriend had to make the choice to, leave me with our son because I wasn't a safe environment around to be around. Like I wasn't like abusive or anything like that. It's just I was a drunk. It's I wasn't drinking every day at that time, but I would black out and I'd be sloppy, right? I'd be hiding alcohol in my pillowcases or around where I'd have to get up in the morning and I would drink. And I didn't have a license at the time and I wasn't anywhere close to getting it back. So she had to make the choice, and I don't blame her. But she had to make that choice. Then I started going downhill again. I went back to work, and then they actually said, "Hey, listen, like we love you here. You work hard, but you need to take a break." So at one point, I'm sitting at home, I'm trying to go to counseling, I'm trying to take my meds, and nothing's getting better. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I don't think I can do this. At one point, I drank too much. And I ended up in the hospital for the third time with alcohol poisoning, second time in 3 weeks, and had IVs hooked up into me. And I'm pasty and I'm pale, I'm sweating, and I'm laying on this hospital bed. And my ex brought my son in, and he looked at me, looked at her, looked at me, looked at her, and was like, what's wrong, mommy? What's wrong with daddy? And I was like, oh, this kid deserves better than this. So my mindset was like, you know what? If I just end it, my parents still understand. They're gonna look at me and be like, okay, well, at least he's not in pain anymore. They'll get over it eventually. My ex, she's smart, intelligent, beautiful, big heart. She's super kind. She'll find the right man for my son. And he's 3 years old. He's not gonna remember me. So I'm like, you know what? I just gonna end this. And I became an organ donor. I got milk thistle for my liver and kidney flush for my kidneys as I was preparing my body to give it to somebody because I didn't think I deserved it. So I'm like, if I'm going to do this, I might as well just give it to somebody that's deserving of this. Because I always put people on a pedestal ahead of me. Has such self-worth. All I wanted to do was see other people happy. And I'm like, you're worth the world. I'm not worth anything. Luckily, I started going to the gym, and I only went to the gym so I could, try to impress girls. And because I still had such a low self-worth, like I did anything I could to impress people. Like at the mill, I wanted to be the hardest worker, and I was. It's so people would like me though. So they could see value in me that I didn't see. But I started listening to motivational speaking on YouTube, and I had no idea who I was listening to. And it was guys like Inky Johnson, Trent Shelton, Les Brown, and Eric Thomas, who I had no idea at the time. They're like top 10 speakers in the world. But I'm listening to these guys, and they start talking about finding your why. So I was like, okay, well, I started to ask myself, so like, find your why to inspire you, to motivate you, to keep you going on. I'm like, well, what is my why? I'm like, well, I can't do it for me. And, a lot of people say do it for yourself. But personally, I couldn't do it for myself, and I know a lot of addicts that couldn't. But what I have to do, I got to find that person I could do it for. So I started looking at the little boy, and I'm like, okay, what if I did it for him? I know I'm a good person. I know my capabilities. What if I got better for him? If I get better for him, I get better for me. So your why always comes back on you, always. But if I get better for me, I can actually help other people. So with that, I'm like, okay, so what's the why is the belief? What is the how? Well, the how, go to rehab. So I went back to rehab. But the second time I went, I put my drinking aside. Instead of trying to quit drinking, I'm like, well, why do I drink? So I went with the power of why. Why do I drink? I'm depressed. Why am I depressed? Well, low self-worth, low self-esteem, low self-confidence. Well, why am I like that? Well, I always compared myself to other people. And and I didn't learn how to talk about what I was feeling. And I also didn't learn how to cope with it in a healthy way. And I didn't learn self-love. Okay, so what am I going to do? How am I going to fix that? Well, I'm going to do everything they teach me. like implement. So they taught us stuff like gratitude, mindfulness, positive affirmations, the I am statements. We went over like guilt and shame, how, you know what, a lot of addicts, they feel guilt and shame, but the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is you did something bad, but shame is you are bad. So, you know, me personally, I labeled myself as I am bad because I knew every time I picked up that drink that I might not stop. I knew that every time I picked up that drink or did that drug, you know, I could miss time with at work or my son. So I knew all the choices I was making. So I labeled myself as bad. But then they showed us the power of vulnerability and authenticity and being real. Not only just being real with other people, but being real with yourself. And then they taught us about, you know, acceptance and forgiveness, and how acceptance and forgiveness is actually for you. So what do you have to accept in life? You know, did somebody hurt you? Was there, you know, an experience you went through that you had to forgive? Or is it you that you have to accept? Or is it you that you have to forgive? Because when it comes down to acceptance, you have to realize that, hey, it actually happened. You don't have to like it, but you had to acknowledge, hey, this happened in my life, and then you got to forgive it, because if you don't forgive it, it's really hard to create your future when you're living in the past. So
Yeah,
there's things that,
if you keep beating yourself up, then you're
yeah,
always going to be in that place of shame and guilt. You're never going to move out of it.
no, 100%. And then you keep labeling yourself, and but then what happens when you're doing that? Well, then your internal dialogue is getting bad. Like, I'm calling myself a failure, and I'm hopeless, and I'm a loser, and then I start to project those thoughts into other people's head. Like, oh, there's my friend. Oh, he just thinks I'm a loser. But then you got to learn how to question that thought. Well, is it true? Well, no. Well, did he say it to you? Well, no, he didn't. Well, is it absolutely true? Well, no, it's not. Well, how would I feel if I didn't have that thought? Well, I'd probably feel pretty good. So then you got to learn to challenge that thought. So then, you know what? I got out of rehab. I was feeling great for 3 months. I was doing really good. And then the pink cloud came back to where, oh my God, I got to do this. You know, I tell people that you don't choose to be an addict. You don't choose addiction. However, you choose to stay in addiction. The hardest part of addiction isn't quitting, but it's living in sobriety. So then I started to go back downhill to where eventually I had to hospitalize myself on January 4th, 2019, and say it out loud in front of my parents and the counselor that I had a plan. And that plan was to end it. And since that day, I've been sober ever since. So 28 months. I've done 2 coaching certifications, 2 speaking courses, made my own personal development program. I spoke to over 500 people on mental health and addiction, and realized that when I wanted to make change, I had to ask for help. But then I also had to accept the help.
And asking for help is the hardest thing you can do. I know from my own experiences, I hit a rock bottom, and I couldn't ask for help. I
Well,
was just done with everything you talked about, the shame, the guilt, the frustration, the depression, comparing yourself to other people. And when you get yourself in that spot, you can't even ask for help. And that's why I feel it's so important to share stories like yours, especially when it comes to men, because I believe male suicide is higher than female. And I'm the mother of 2 young men, and it's a conversation that we have a lot. Why is this a concern for men? We've even had in the past less than 18 months, we've had 2 male friends commit suicide. And that was always the question is, well, why didn't they just ask for help? There's this, there's that. And I tried explaining to people that when you're in that moment of darkness, asking for help doesn't even cross your mind. How do you even begin?
mm-hmm.
How did you? So my question to you is, how did you begin, or how did you ask for help?
Well, when you get in that mindset, like I said, I literally thought my son would be better off without me, that my family would be better off without me. I didn't want to die, but I wanted the pain to end. I even told my doctor, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to do it right now, but if this goes on, I can't do it. Like, I can't. It took me a long time because I lived by the man up stigma. You got to man up. And then I was like, okay, no, I need help. Like I knew what I was doing was wrong. I think people are more self-aware than they think. I think most people are more I personally believe people are more self-aware than they think. It's by being self-aware, you have to admit what you're going through. You got to ask yourself the tough questions, and then you got to answer it. So, like me, I avoided those questions. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not depressed. But when I started to ask myself, um, throughout my story, I talk about asking myself questions like, what is my why, Justin? Okay. And then why do you want to get better? Why do you drink? Do you think you're an alcoholic? Do you think you do too much drugs? Do you think you're depressed? I started to question myself, and then it's questioning your thoughts. So when you can start to question yourself, but I mean, don't get out of control, like when you think you're doing something good, but it's if it's giving you some pushback, start to question it. Or if you don't like what's going on, you got to start to question it. But I just start reaching out for help at 28. However, it comes down to the acceptance parts. I wasn't accepting the help. I mean, I kind of was, but when I got better, I kept pushing the counseling and the medication aside. When I got sober, I thought I could keep doing it. So I didn't accept that I shouldn't drink, and I didn't accept that I couldn't do it alone. So when we can get by the man up stigma, because I talked to a girls club from Kitsilano, and she asked me a question. She's like, I have these guys that said they're struggling, and I asked them what they're going to do, and they said, oh, we're going to man up. And she's like, what do I say to that? Well, it's simple. Ask them this. How's that working for you?
Yeah. And it's something, we've had these conversations, and it says it's something that society puts on boys at a very young age, that they're meant to be brave and strong and protectors, and they're going to get married and have a family, and they've got to take care of them. And, as women, we forget that there are all these pressures that are put on them. And that's why it can be so difficult to have those conversations. And even, in raising our boys, I taught them one thing and was doing a completely different thing for myself. I didn't extend that same grace to myself. And you say it took you until you were 28 to ask for help. Well, I applaud you, because I'm turning 48, and I've only recently really started to share my story, what I went through, and started getting, I've been self-healing over the last few years, but starting to get the help,
Well,
because it's hard to ask.
yeah. Well, you know what? When I was in rehab, I felt more normal around them, around people in rehab, than I felt around my friends. And to this day, you know what? There's only a couple people that know how dark I truly was. Unless my friends decide to listen to any of the podcasts I've been on, I don't go up and say, hey, this is what I actually went through, because it would shock them. They'd be like, holy cow. They probably wouldn't even know, because I got good at wearing that mask.
Yeah.
That mask of deception, the inner versus the outer feelings. So I applaud you for reaching out. It takes a strong person to finally admit that. And I was lucky that when I was in rehab, I had a friend that I played baseball who's a youth counselor. So she's like, I want you to come speak to these troubled teens. So when I got out, I went and spoke to them, and the way they looked at me, some of them, some didn't pay attention, they didn't care. But the way a lot of them looked at me, because I'm 6'3", I am 240, I am tattooed all up and down, and I don't look like that guy that's going to come and say, hey, I struggle with depression, right?
Yeah.
So I saw right then and there, hey, you know what? And like, I always liked Trent Shelton and all those guys. Listen to him speak. I'm like, I want to do that, but I didn't ever think it was possible. But watching that, and then every time I go to speak and I get to see people looking at me, it's, they become my why. My why to get better was my son. My why to do speaking and coaching is people who are struggling. My why is still to be like a role model for my kid, but it's to let people know the possibilities, or the capabilities of mental health if you're not paying attention to it. The capabilities of what it can do to you if you don't get help for it, or if you push it down. And also what the power of addiction can do. And there's a reason why people drink. There's a reason why people do drugs. I know, there are some people that just like to drink and they can shut it off though. there's some people that they need that. So I drank to change my mindset. I knew that from 24 on. I drank to have confidence, to change my mindset, to feel better about myself. And ultimately, sometimes I drank just so I would stop thinking about dying.
So how have you taken all of your experiences and what you've been through on this journey? How have you taken that and to now help other people? You said that you had a course.
Yeah, so I have a personal development program. It goes over like identifying your triggers, procrastination, accountability, setting healthy boundaries, which is a big one for people because they feel guilty saying no to people. When by saying no to somebody else, you say yes to yourself. I think that's Paulo Coelho. But also finding your why, setting up habits and goals, something to strive for. It's not counseling by any means. It's figuring out why you do what you do and identifying it, acknowledging it, and then trying to figure out how are you going to move past it. So, defeating self-limiting beliefs, setting up unshakable, improved self-confidence. So they work with me one-on-one for 12 weeks. They get homework and modules. Plus, we get to talk about whatever they want to change in their life, or whatever they want to create in their life during that session. And they get an accountability sheet where they actually grade themselves every week. Like, hey, how did I show up this week? Okay, was I turn that alarm off? Or did I keep hitting snooze when I should have just got up? So it's a lifestyle change. But then I go around to speak. So this Wednesday, I actually get to go speak to a bunch of grade 9, 10 boys on what I went through. So, and that's very rewarding. I actually got to speak at where I used to work at the mill. So they kind of started to understand why I was going through, because they just thought I was an alcoholic. They didn't really understand
the depth
of
it.
it. Yeah. And then I actually went and spoke at my mom's work, which was in front of 50 adults. And there were some guys in there that actually, because we're in a small town of 18,000, and I'm a pretty active guy. And a lot of the guys, some of the guys I played hockey with, and then I got up and stood up there and I spoke, and they're just like, "Oh man, holy cow!" There's Justin, like he's that funny guy, he tries to make everybody laugh, he's strong, right? And no, actually, this is who I am. But it was cool because after that time, one guy got up and he spoke. Like after he spoke, he just said, "Hey, I suffer from depression too," and then he went into like a 10-minute spiel of him, and I was like, mind blowing. And I partnered up with Canadian Mental Health, and then other people reached out and made appointments with them.
That's amazing. So if somebody's listening now, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
You can visit my website at www.justinbrien.com, or my Instagram, which is linked to that, is just justinbrien19. Send me an email, justin@justinbrien.com. If you tell me what resonates with you or what you got out of this podcast, or even just DM me on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to become the stronger you, let's do it.
Join you. Yeah, I'm going to make sure all of those links are in the show notes. Justin, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride, 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 ride. Roller coaster. Ride, ride, roller coaster.